April 1945. Bavaria. The camp had been liberated for less than a day when George Patton walked through the wire. The survivors did not rush him. They did not cheer. Most of them stayed close to the barracks, watching the Americans the way men watch a bridge they are not sure will hold. They had learned what uniforms could do. Then one man stepped away from the wall. He was not young. He was not old. The camp had taken those categories from him. He moved slowly across the yard, one narrow step at a time, past the puddles, past the open gate, past the soldiers who still did not know where to look. Patton saw him coming. The guards saw him too. The man reached the general, lifted both hands, and grabbed the sleeve of Patton's field jacket. Not gently, not violently, desperately. One guard moved his rifle. Patton raised one gloved hand. Hold! The guard froze. The man was not attacking him. He was holding on like the cloth might vanish if his fingers opened. He kept saying one word in German, again and again. Real, real. Patton stood still in the middle of the yard, while a starving man gripped his uniform and tried to decide whether the world had weight. The interpreter leaned close. He says you are real, sir. Patton looked at the man's hands, then at the man's face, then at the wire behind him. And for once, the loudest American general in Europe did not answer loudly. He only asked, "What is your name?" That question hit the man harder than the uniform, because for 3 years, nobody had asked him that first. Not a guard, not a clerk, not a doctor, not a man with a clipboard. They had asked for a number, a work category, a transport mark, a body count, but not a name. His name was Elias Kroner. Before the war, Elias had been a printer in Augsburg. Not a famous printer, not a political man, not a man whose life belonged in any history book. He set letters by hand in a narrow shop, off a street where carts still rattled in the morning, and church bells counted the hours, whether anyone cared or not. His father had taught him the trade. His father's father had owned the first press. Elias knew the weight of letters, the way a name looked upside down in metal type, the way ink turned a private life into something other people could read. He had a wife named Miriam, a son, Aaron, a daughter, Lotte. In 1942, they were taken while he was repairing a press belt 2 streets away. When Elias came home, the apartment was open. The kettle was cold. One of Lotte's shoes was under the table. A neighbor whispered that he should leave the city before night. Elias did not leave. He spent 2 days looking for them. On the 3rd morning, the police found him. He survived the camp for reasons that never felt like reasons. He survived because he could fix a jammed typewriter, because he could repair a numbering stamp, because the office needed labels, lists, work cards, transport sheets, because even a place built to erase names still needed machines that made records. Useful men lasted a little longer. Stubborn men lasted a little longer than that. And some men lasted because death kept passing them in the dark and somehow chose the man beside them. By April 1945, Elias weighed less than the paper bundles he used to carry in his print shop. When the Americans came through the gate, he did not celebrate. He stood in the yard with the others. A young soldier offered him a cigarette. Elias held it without lighting it. Another soldier gave him chocolate. He put it in his pocket because food was no longer something his body trusted immediately. That first night, he slept on top of his blanket because he did not believe anyone was allowed to sleep inside a bed. And when he woke the next morning, he saw an American officer walking through the camp with 4 white stars on his helmet and a face that looked carved out of command. Patton had already seen camps by then. Not one. Not just the famous name people would remember later. All through April, the Third Army kept finding the places the Germans had not had time to hide. Subcamps, labor compounds, transit yards, sheds with numbers on the doors. Rooms that smelled like bodies and bleach and panic. Every time, Patton gave nearly the same orders. Photograph it before anything changes. Collect the records before anyone burns them. Bring local German civilians through the gates and make them look. Get doctors to the living before officers start arguing over reports. Names first, paper next. Burial last, but burial with witnesses. He was not gentle about it. Patton was almost never gentle, but there was a difference between a hard man and a careless one. In those camps, he seemed to understand something many commanders did not understand quickly enough. Liberation was not only opening the gate. Liberation was making sure the gate could not later be called a rumor. It had to be photographed, recorded, named, pinned down so tightly that denial could not lift it. That was why he was in the yard that morning. Not for a speech, not for a ceremony, for proof. And Elias Kroner walked toward him because proof was exactly what he needed. For 3 years, the guards had told him the outside was gone. Germany was gone. His street was gone. His family was gone. The old world was gone. Only the wire was real. Only hunger was real. Only orders were real. So when he saw Patton standing there, Elias did not want to thank him. Not yet. He did not want to ask for help. Not yet. He wanted to touch the outside world and feel resistance. He wanted cloth under his fingers. Weight, a seam, a sleeve that did not dissolve. So he grabbed the general's jacket and held on, and Patton let him. The yard became very quiet. A few survivors stood in the doorways. 2 American soldiers looked away because they could not watch and could not leave. The interpreter waited. Patton did not remove the man's hands. He did not smooth the jacket. He did not step back into rank or ceremony. He did not turn the moment into command. He asked the name first. Elias Kroner, the interpreter said. Patton repeated it once, carefully. Elias Kroner. The man looked at him, startled. Not because the pronunciation was perfect. It was not. Because the general had tried. Patton asked where he was from. Augsburg, Elias said, near the old market. Patton turned slightly toward one of his aides. Have our people been through Augsburg? The aide nodded. Yes, sir. Damaged, but standing in places. Patton looked back at Elias. Your city is not gone. The interpreter gave the words in German. Elias kept holding the sleeve. Patton said it again, slower. Damaged, but not gone. Something changed in the man's face. It was not happiness. Happiness would have been too clean for that yard. It was a crack in the wall where a future could get in. The apartment might be empty. The street might be burned. His family might never answer. But the city existed. A place can be broken and still exist. A man can be broken and still exist. Patton seemed to understand that he had not given comfort. He had given coordinates. Then he pointed toward the aide's notebook. Put him in the registry today. Full name, hometown, trade, any family names he gives. Today, not tomorrow. The aide opened the book. Elias's hands tightened once more on the sleeve. Patton looked down. You hear that? The interpreter translated. Your name goes down before the sun does. Elias stared at him. For 3 years, papers had carried him deeper into the machine. Now one paper might help pull him out of it. He slowly released the sleeve. The khaki fabric stayed wrinkled where his fingers had been. Elias noticed the creases. So did Patton. Neither man moved for a second. Then Elias did something almost impossible for a body that weak. He straightened. Not like a soldier, like a man trying to return to his own height. He nodded once. Not gratitude, not obedience, recognition. As if he had been told, you are still a person. And he was answering, I heard you. The aide wrote his name, Elias Kroner, printer, Augsburg, wife, Miriam, son, Aaron, daughter, Lotte. 3 years in labor custody. Needs medical review. Needs tracing request. The line did not restore what had been stolen. It did not bring back Miriam. It did not find Aaron. It did not explain Lotte's shoe under the table. But it changed one thing immediately. Elias was no longer only a number inside a camp that had tried to outlive him. He was a named man in an American register, witnessed in the open air, while the general whose sleeve he had crushed stood close enough to read the entry. Patton asked to hear it back. The aide read it. Elias Kroner, sir, again. The aide glanced up, then read the whole line. Patton nodded. Make sure it is copied clean. That was all. No speech, no grand promise, no battlefield thunder. Just a name, written carefully enough to survive the day. Later, men would tell larger stories about Patton, the tanks, the speed, the temper, the polished pistols, the language no chaplain could soften. Those stories were true enough, but they were not the whole man. In a liberated camp in Bavaria, the whole war briefly narrowed down to a sleeve, a grip, a translator, and a name. That was the part no map could show. May came. Then June. Elias moved through the displaced person system with a file that for once did not start with a number. The file had a name, a hometown, a trade, family names, a date of liberation, a medical note, a tracing request, small things. But after the camp, small things were not small. A blanket was not small. A closed door was not small. A bowl of soup that did not have to be stolen was not small. A man saying your name without spitting it was not small. By late summer, Elias was strong enough to travel west. The train did not go all the way. Too many lines were broken. Too many bridges were out. Too much of Germany existed in fragments. He rode where he could, walked when he had to, slept, sitting up because sleep still felt like something someone might punish. When he reached Augsburg, he found the old market, scarred but standing. His street was there, not whole, not merciful, but there. His building had no glass in the front windows. The stairs smelled of dust and old smoke. The apartment door hung crooked. Inside, the rooms were empty. No kettle, no bedclothes, no shoe under the table anymore. Someone had taken even that. Elias stood in the doorway for a long time. Then he went downstairs. The print shop was worse. The front room had burned. The press was cracked. The typecases were overturned. Thousands of tiny metal letters spilled across the floor like a language smashed apart. He sat among them until dark. On the second day, he picked up one letter, an E. On the third day, he found an L. By the end of the week, he had enough letters to set his own name in a composing stick. Eliaskroner. His hands shook so badly that the line fell apart twice. The third time it held. He inked the form with a rag, pressed paper over it by hand, lifted the sheet. There it was. Black letters on cheap paper, Elias Kroner. The first thing he printed after coming home was not a notice, not a business sign, not a price list. It was proof that the name still made an impression. By 1948, he had a working shop again, not the old one, not exactly. Nothing after the war was exactly the old one. He printed ration notices, repair slips, mourning cards, school forms, wedding announcements for people who did not know how to smile without guilt. Sometimes displaced families came in with names on scraps of paper. They asked if he could print notices. Missing, seeking, last seen, information wanted. Elias did the work quietly. He never charged widows. He never charged anyone looking for a child. When people thanked him, he only said names should be clear. In 1953, a local journalist came to write about people who had returned to their trades after the war. He asked Elias about the day the camp was liberated. Elias did not want to make a story of it. He said there was not much to tell. The journalist asked what he remembered most. Elias looked at his hands. I grabbed a man's sleeve, he said. The journalist stopped writing. Why? Elias thought for a long time. Because they told us there was no outside anymore. He looked toward the front window of the shop, where the streetcars had started running again. I wanted to know if outside had weight. The journalist asked if the officer had pulled away. Elias shook his head. He let me hold on. That was the sentence he kept, not the rank, not the speech, not the army. He let me hold on. Then Elias added something the journalist almost missed. He asked my name first. The journalist asked why that mattered. Elias gave a small, tired smile. Because a number can be moved. A name must be answered. The article ran in a small Augsburg paper. Most people read it over breakfast and turned the page. Patton had been dead for years by then. The war had already begun turning into monuments, uniforms in glass, and speeches said on the right days. But in Elias's shop, the story remained practical. A sleeve, a name, a register, a line of type that held. He worked there until his hands became too stiff to set small letters. He trained an apprentice, sold him the shop for less than it was worth, kept one drawer of damaged metal type in his apartment. When Elias died decades later, the funeral was modest. No general stood there. No army band played. No one mentioned the sleeve in the first prayer. They spoke of his work, his patience, the way he printed missing person notices without charge, the way he corrected every misspelled name before the ink dried. That was the life he rebuilt. And maybe that is why the morning in Bavaria mattered. Not because it was the largest thing that happened. It was not. The largest thing was survival. The larger thing was going home. The hardest thing was living afterward, one ordinary morning at a time. But before any of that could begin, a man who had been turned into a number had to touch the world outside the wire and feel that it did not disappear. He had to hear a general ask for his name. He had to see someone write it down before the day ended. The sleeve was only cloth. The name was the proof.